A Fox News alert. President Trump's historic trip to the Middle East heads to Doha, Qatar any minute now after he meets with other Arab leaders in Riyadh.
The president spoke about his vision for the Middle East and major issues impacting the region, including Iran's nuclear ambitions.
I want to make a deal with Iran. I want to do something if it's possible. But for that to happen, it must stop sponsoring terror, halt its bloody proxy wars, and permanently and verifiably cease its pursuit of nuclear weapons. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
You are watching Fox and Friends First here on our Wednesday morning. I am Todd Pyro.
And I'm Carly Shimkus. Kevin Corke joins us now after covering the president's trip overnight. And Kevin, what a busy overnight it was.
Yeah, really incredible when you really just sort of lay it all out. We tend to think of President Trump as a transactional president. That's certainly been his reputation. But I think the more you watch what's happening, not just here at the GCC summit, but throughout his presidency, it's only been 100 days here in Trump 2.0, he's really trying to be a transformational president. We're talking about someone who's, yes, trying to foment peace between Ukraine and Russia, between India and Pakistan. And now he's talking about really changing the way things operate in the Middle East. Of course, at the GCC today, he talked about the lifting of sanctions on Syria. As I got in my readout, thanks to Harrison Fields and others, he was thanked by the president of Turkey and, of course, the Crown Prince himself. This idea that Syria can stand on its own 2 feet, and with help and with a push toward peace and prosperity, they can do it, and they can count on the U.S. to try to help.
We're currently exploring normalizing relations with Syria's new government, as you know, beginning with my meeting with President Ahmed al-Shara, also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start. It gives them a chance for greatness. The sanctions were really crippling, very powerful.
The Crown Prince, by the way, called the president's decision to lift the sanctions courageous. Meantime, the president also talked about some of the ideas of halting hostilities. I mentioned Russia and Ukraine. I mentioned, obviously, India and Pakistan, but also what's been happening over in Gaza, this idea that if Israel and the folks who are in Gaza can somehow come together and foment a peace, this will not only change the region, it could change the world.
In Gaza, my administration shares the hope of so many in this region for future of safety and dignity of the Palestinian people, but that cannot happen as long as Gaza's leaders take delight in raping, torturing, and murdering innocent people. Can't have it. Ultimately, all hostages of all nationalities must be released as a stepping stone to peace, and I think it's going to be happening. A lot of things are happening. A lot of very positive things are happening on every front.
Now, as you mentioned, Carly, the president is now on the move, or shortly will be. Next up, it's a trip to Qatar. That's the next stop in this trip, although there have been some rumblings that perhaps he could make a stop to see Adnan Alexander in Israel, which would certainly be apropos given what has happened to that young man and the incredible work to bring him home safely. An interesting time, to say the least, guys. Back to you.
It certainly is. Kevin Corke, live for us in Washington. Kevin, thank you so much. Let's bring in Ellie Cohanim, former State Department Deputy Special Envoy under President Trump. Ellie, good morning to you. Another busy overnight with the president overseas. Let's start with what the president has already done this morning, which is meet with the new president of Syria, who is someone who used to lead a branch of al-Qaeda, also announcing the lifting of sanctions of Syria. Why is this in the United States' best interest?
Well, it's possibly in the United States' best interest in the sense that the president is giving the new government of Syria a chance to recreate itself. Syria, as we know, had become a terror proxy of Iran and as well of Russia. And so by President Trump giving them this opportunity to reshape their future, he's allowing them to leave the Iranian sphere and hopefully go into the sphere of the moderate Sunni Arab states like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we saw the president even acknowledge in his historic speech yesterday that he was doing it for Crown Prince MBS in some way.
This was an ask of the Crown Princes to do this.
It seems like it was. And again, you know, if the Syrians make the right choices, this could in fact bring a bright future for their people and hopefully for the entire region.
Now let's look ahead to today. Any moment now, the president will be headed to Qatar. How should the average American watching today's events really square the circle when it comes to Qatar? Trump's goal of trying to bring them in as a partner with the obvious elephant in the room. Their bankrolling of Hamas over the years to the tune of $2 billion.
Yeah, the relationship with Qatar is very complicated. I like to remind the audience it was President Obama who originally asked them to host Hamas. And the funding to Hamas was well known. I think the theory back then was that there was a way to buy off Hamas and try to moderate them. And so I think October 7th has blown through that theory and proven that you actually cannot buy off people who are ideological, who are terrorists, and who want to, undermine the very existence of the Jewish state of Israel. So the president's next visit now to Qatar certainly gives President Trump the opportunity to do what he does best, which is, in fact, bring, again, countries in that region into the American sphere of influence, give them an opportunity to pivot, and so hopefully we will see the Qataris pivot away from funding and continuing to support the extremists, the rejectionists, the terrorists in the region, and move again more into the U.S. sphere, move more towards peace with Israel, the Abraham Accords. I have to say, President Trump, in his speech yesterday, historic speech, said it's his dream for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. This was a moment that all of us should really reflect upon and relish the historicness of that, and certainly that invitation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia extends to the entire region.
Well, Ellie, he said that yesterday. Also, he re-upped that today with these remarks here. Watch.
At the end of my first term, all of the momentum in this region was toward peace. I especially want to thank and congratulate the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain for their vision and courage in signing the historic Abraham Accords. In the future, we'll continue that progress by adding more countries to the Abraham Accords. We have the 4, and I think they're going to be filling up very rapidly.
These accords clearly on his mind. Yesterday, his speech ran a little under an hour. He made one request, and it was for Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. How do you think that moment was received by the Crown Prince, and do you think it is possible for this to take place over the next 4 years?
I absolutely do think that, thanks to President Trump's leadership, it's a question of when, not if, we're going to see Saudi normalization with Israel. And I think the Crown Prince received it as well as he could in the moment that we are all in, which is there's still the war raging in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. I think the Israelis need to achieve victory in Gaza, right? Resolve that, and we need to see the United States hopefully have success in the talks with Iran, the nuclear talks. And when we achieve some regional stability, normalization will be hopefully next steps.
One final question in the realm of the impossible to the possible. This is in a completely different sphere, the Ukraine-Russia war. Russia-Ukraine peace talks set to take place tomorrow in Turkey. All eyes are on whether or not Putin will join. Zelensky saying, I won't be there unless Putin's there. Trump potentially could be there. Realistically, tomorrow, less than 24 hours from now, will we see Trump, Putin, and Zelensky all in a room together?
You know what, Todd? I think that is such a long shot right now. We know the president has said that Secretary Rubio will be there. We still can't get a yes from Putin. And as you just mentioned, even Zelensky right now is kind of hedging. I think that no administration has put in more time and effort in trying to resolve all these wars and conflicts that the president has inherited from the Biden administration. So certainly we know that's going to be an ongoing effort, but very, very difficult, it seems, to get these presidents to sit face to face, which is what the ask is right now to them, and really get to final resolution ending the needless killing of that war.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to President Trump's comments on Iran yesterday, where he said, I'm giving you an olive branch, you will not have a nuke. And he also said, one way or another, make your move now. Iran's ambition is to stretch this out, and the president clearly understands that and is saying now or never.
Exactly right. It's an ultimatum the president has given the Iranians, and we can only hope that the Iranian regime understands how fortunate they are to have the choice being presented to them. Let's hope they make the right choice.
It's almost like every foreign policy topic is on the table right now. Ellie Cohanim, thank you for helping us with that.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.